let's look at the selective application of blasphemy laws recently. If you want to find out about blasphemy, you can go over and subscribe to our website for as little as £5 a month, get all our premium content, and watch me subject Carl to a struggle session on whether or not Jesus Christ was a socialist. Short version, no. No, he wasn't. No. In fact, Marxism is the philosophy of the devil, and I'll allow you to elaborate further on that if you want to watch that in your own time. But first on to the UK. There was recently a Conservative councillor who was kicked out of the party for tweeting that pride is not a virtue, it's a sin. This is King Lawal, what a name, from Northamptonshire, and he's suspended from the party pending an investigation involving CCHQ for tweeting, "When did pride become a thing to celebrate? Because of pride, Satan fell as an archangel. Pride is not a virtue, but a sin. Those who have pride should repent of their sins and return to Jesus Christ. He can save you," alongside an image of a verse from Isaiah 3:9. He was forced to resign from his job in a nursing and care business as well, removed as a trustee from an organisation that helps children get access to green spaces, and suspended as an academy council member for Weavers Academy, which is a secondary school. The reason for this was Councillor Jason Smithers, who was the leader of the North Northamptonshire Council, again, Conservative. With Conservatives like these, who needs enemies? And he says, "We're an inclusive group. We continue to be committed to reducing inequality within our communities and creating a fair and inclusive environment for everyone. We fully support our LGBTQ plus community as we support all communities." Where does this community live? Who are its members? Who are you speaking for? Are you actually meant to be representing the Northamptonshire people who elected this man in? And it seems that he actually represents their views, or at least the views of some of them. As we'll get onto later, it's actually acceptable for some religions, some Abrahamic religions, to discriminate against gay people or whatever hypothetical alphabet constituency you would like to put together, but not Christians. You're not allowed to say that the state sponsorship of something that goes against my religion is sinful, turns out. This is why the Conservatives lose, though. So Lawal, in his defence, said, "As the only black councillor in the whole of Northamptonshire, I know what it's like to be in the minority, and I would never discriminate against anyone." Why are you using the intersectional framework? Be a conservative, please. Just say, "No, I affirmatively believe this, and you should not be persecuting me based on my belief, because there's probably constituents who agree with me. You don't need to also pull the victimhood card and lay it on the table, because this victimhood will trump this victimhood every single time." They should know by now, right? It's just frustrating. But then there's another case as well, and I had the pleasure of meeting this gentleman, Ben Dubowski. So he was born in Poland and raised under communism. So you'd think he would be very astute to how political persecution works. And Ben was removed from his school because he was in a mandatory diversity training seminar, and he was asked to give his views on marriage. This was to root out unconscious bias. I only think it was because it was trying to provoke teachers who spoke common sense into being consciously biased, I suppose. He said that he believed marriage was between a man and a woman, that life begins at conception, and that he was opposed to some aspects of Sharia law, such as the stoning of men for homosexuality. Very far right. Don't kill gay people. All right, fair enough. Next morning, he said he was summoned before the headmaster, Mark Belly, and then ejected from the Bishop of Llandaff Church in Wales School near Cardiff. Belly, the headmaster, had previously faced criticism from parents because he spent 20 grand on open-plan gender-neutral toilets. That's really going to keep your female students safe, isn't it? I mean, you've been to the GB News studio before. I was there yesterday, and there were a group of female producers who were waiting for one man to stop using the toilet so they could all go in. Yeah. Like, I don't blame women for not wanting to share a toilet with men, even those they know, because it's just a sort of private space. And then those they don't know, it's a genuine risk. Yeah. So schoolgirls with things going on that they'd rather keep private, don't just use it as a Trojan horse for predators. We saw what happened with Loudoun County. We don't want to go there again. You know?
Quite.
So, and also, like, why is a Christian school hiring intersectional race activists to come into the classroom and berate their teachers on unconscious bias? Because this was run by a group called Diverse, and this is a Welsh word, Cymru.
Cymru, I think it's the word for Wales, isn't it?
Well, there we go. The Welsh used to be the word we use for foreigner, so I'm going to use it as my excuse for not being able to pronounce it properly. You're Scottish. I already need subtitles. And the seminar was on workforce diversity practice, unconscious bias, and transgender identity and gender expression awareness in a Christian school.
Yeah.
I mean, I shouldn't be shocked because obviously the Church of England is largely captured these days. Did you see the Holy See during Pride Month in America flew a pride flag outside their Washington embassy?
I did not see that. That surprises me. But I mean, what the theme that ties together in both these stories is the absolutely hypocritical use of the word inclusivity to mean exclusivity. They've just rooted out people with Christian beliefs that were very common in this country till about 5 minutes ago and are still common amongst a great percentage of voters here. They've ratted them out and in the name of being inclusive have excluded them. That's not a diverse society. That's not something that's not democratic. Free democratic society allows everybody to have a free exchange of views and not be punished for what they believe. No one should be criminalized for just stating a Christian view or any other sort of religious view on this issue if you're able to have a conversation about it, which both of these people have perfectly graciously been able to offer their opinions and beliefs on a forum where they should be very much entitled to. So it is horrendous to see our country go this way of rooting out what's now a minority faith according to the last census, rooting out these people and saying because you think this, because you believe your holy book, because you believe the ideology that you have bought into, you have to be punished. You have to be excommunicated from your job and exiled from the community and punished. It's just a great sadness and a great irony that we pride ourselves on being a democracy and internationally would be champions of free speech, but in our own country we can't sort ourselves out to include everybody.
Well, obviously we've had speech laws on the books for the last nearly 30 years now, so that shouldn't surprise anyone. But neither should the linguistic subversion of language. I mean, you're clearly a very compassionate and tolerant person. They like to parasitize the words that you would, of course, use to try to be accepting of people, even if you don't share their beliefs. Inclusivity simply just means we're going to practice repressive tolerance.
Right. It's inclusive of the people who agree with the state.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're gonna ostracize any opinion that does not get us towards our progressive utopia. Diversity just means we're going to create a vanguard constituency of aggrieved minorities that we can raise the consciousness in to overthrow the society. And democracy means we act on behalf of you, because actually we have divined from the tea leaves our destination, and we have the time as a laptop class to sit around and look up Marxist literature. And you oppressed proletariat, don't worry, we'll do it on your behalf and you'll thank us later.
And it was these exact arguments that were used to challenge the original blasphemy laws that were in our country and in order to protect the church, and those were wrong too, because that's not an inclusive and free society. That doesn't allow the free exchange of thought and belief, and people rallied against that and said, no, we can't have blasphemy laws because we need to have everybody being able to exchange their views. We are a kind of archaic society. Everyone said, fair enough, let's get rid of the blasphemy laws. But what's happened now is they've just put in new blasphemy laws for a different faith. It's essentially a state religion, a lot of this stuff, they have their own kind of prophets and priests who kind of declare the ideology of the day in our celebrity culture. They've got rules that cannot be crossed and things that cannot be said and blasphemy that cannot be uttered, whether that's to criticize, the Pride Parade, which a lot of people were very critical of this year, given clips that came out of very provocative dancing in front of kids, and other things that a lot of people who are, would also describe themselves as very tolerant, felt it was too far for this to be exposed on the streets of Britain. So, saying that these things are the things that you cannot say, the words that you must not utter, that is, again, a dominant religion enforcing its beliefs on a minority. We're just right back to where we were. Like, why can we never find this balance where people are allowed to exchange their views?
Well, yeah, I think there's always going to be a religion. Man always has a religious instinct. So you either worship something outside of yourself or you worship yourself. This is why Christianity deems pride a sin, because it's arrogance, it's Promethean, versus the pride flag. It's not a religion of gratitude, it's a religion of gratification. And so if there's any impediment for you getting your rocks off, well, actually they're the oppressor and they have to be rooted out via the Inquisition. And that's what this is. It's a new Inquisition in every single institution. Speaking of, it's actually happening in Europe as well. And this was a story that you brought my attention to. So this was a Finnish parliamentarian, Päivi Räsänen. I had to look up how to pronounce that. So I put my effort in.
Perfect.
So she's a Finnish medical doctor. She's a parliamentarian. She was former Minister of the Interior and chairman of the Christian Democrats Party. And in 2019, she tweeted a passage from Genesis, I believe it was 127, where it's he made them male and female. And she was questioning her church's official sponsorship of the Helsinki LGBTQ Pride event. Now, one would think that an ideology waging war on Imago Dei would be incompatible with Christianity, but they are wearing Christianity as a skin suit. And after the tweet, the police investigated that and a pamphlet that she'd done for her church in 2004. So we're doing offence archaeology now, titled As Man and Woman He Created Them. And it was about sexuality and marriage, because like Ben, she believes that marriage is only between a man and a woman. because it is. Bishop Johanna and this is the one I'm going to
Piola.
Piola. Well, thank you very much. Here we go. He also stood alongside Parvi during her trial for publishing the pamphlet. So again, the Inquisition is going after her. The Prosecutor General in Finland has levied 3 criminal hate speech charges against Parvi, and they're being prosecuted. And I can't believe when I read this, for the crime of ethnic agitation under the section of war crimes and crimes against humanity in the Finnish Criminal Code.
Yeah.
So they're being prosecuted for crimes against the LGBT race, and it's somehow a war. Like this is the hyperbolic rhetoric that we always get when we see trans genocide. And that is the justification for revolution, because if someone were genuinely being genocided by the state, of course they would be right to resist that and fight back and defend themselves if it's an existential threat. So this level of scaremongering, to accuse your opposition of committing war crimes, and also to say you need allies, which is only when you have a war, that's an escalation and a provocation that will only lead in violence.
Right. Pivey's story is a canary in the coal mine for Britain and for the rest of the West, who are also, encouraging each other and increasingly putting in place these hate speech laws, which, as we've just described, are, absolutely oppressing and silencing and censoring those who happen to hold minority beliefs. I got chills down my spine when I heard about that Christian counselor we were describing in the UK, because the tweet that he tweeted was very similar to Pivey's. And Pivey's tweet actually was never even censored by Twitter. Now, cast your mind back to Twitter in 2019. Yes. It was the Jack Dorsey days. It's not the Elon Musk days. Twitter did not find her tweet offensive enough to be censored. She also had a bit of a play on word with the pride shame kind of conundrum. She challenged her own church. She wasn't challenging anyone else, challenging her own church leadership as to why they had sponsored the Pride Parade. I think it was from Romans, the verse that she quoted in that particular tweet. And the state prosecutor found this, launched an investigation. She had about 13 hours being grilled by police, who, by the way, she used to be the head of. She was the former Home Secretary. And she was brought down to the police station to explain her theology, and she was put on criminal trial for 3 charges of hate speech, and put on a stand and grilled as to her theology and whether it was okay nowadays in Finland to say, the philosophy of love the sinner, hate the sin. That's to say, I agree with you I don't have any hatred towards you as a person, but I do disagree with your ideology. And she was actually found innocent. ADF International, my colleagues were working closely on her legal team, and we were very pleased to see her found innocent of all charges and acquitted. However, the Finnish state does not have the principle of double jeopardy, and they have brought her back for retrial, and she'll be going through the entire ordeal again on August 22nd, just in about a month's time. So do remember Pivey and keep tabs on where she ends up at after the second trial. But I think going back to this idea of, our Western culture has completely lost the erosion or distinction between being able to disagree or even viscerally disagree with an opinion and still like that person. It's completely possible to do both. Hating an ideology or hating a religion is not the same as hating that person. And we completely eroded that. And that's led to this idea that, I've seen in my own country of Scotland, when we were putting in hate speech laws, we were saying that any disagreement, any idea that might offend somebody, that's an act of hate towards that person. And therefore you should be criminalized and you should not be allowed out in society. That's not going to be a helpful idea for anybody, especially if, right now it's Christians who are on the front line of these types of laws, often because of our beliefs in marriage, life from conception, all of these ideas which are seen as controversial right now. But, these things are a slippery slope. Once you say that one ideology, belief, or religion can be censored and put aside, you're really opening that up to whatever the next thing is as well. So, if you're not a Christian, if you're not somebody who believes with Pivey or any of these individuals who have been censored and kicked out of their jobs for what they believe, defend them anyway, because tomorrow it might be your beliefs. I think that's something that we really have to take home from these stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And to tie back into the secular, religion without a metaphysics sponsored by the state point, what the reason is that this has become a wedge issue for prosecution is that the LGBT acronym only works if they have sympathy and affirmation poured upon them, because if they feel awkward in private behind closed doors, you can either wrestle with the problems of your personal lifestyle and how you feel about yourself, or you can get the whole world to affirm you. And so it becomes, in the same way that Hegel wrote about recognition as a means of transcending your consciousness, validation for the LGBT lobby becomes their means of non-soul transcendence. And so if you do not affirm their lifestyle, you're a barrier to them living as their true selves. And so you actually have to be censored and eradicated. Otherwise, you really are oppressing them within their own framework. And it is a pseudo-religious framework because it can't stand up to scrutiny as well.
Right.
Whereas the Christian principle of truth and also of forgiveness being conditional on, well, I have compassion for you, but I hope you change your lifestyle, but I'm not willing to impose that lifestyle upon you, because actually by doing that, it takes away the virtue that is in the effort. All of that is removed from that new sexual religion, secular sexual religion. And that's why Nina Power coined the term, I think she said, she combined the term prurient and Puritan, and she called it like puritanical. It's the total removal of forgiveness while also being utterly unforgiving.
No, absolutely. And that is essentially what post-Christian Britain will be, because forgiveness is a Christian concept. Right? Remember, when Christianity first came, to Rome back in the early starts of the foundation of the church, it came to a society where infanticide was rife, treatment of women was abysmal. They were basically sex slaves for whoever owned them at the time. There was very little rule of law, and it was everything that we don't like about society. Everything that harms women, harms minorities, harms children was rife in Roman society at that time. And Christianity brought the idea of justice, of retribution, of overturning cancel culture of the time to say that there is a way to forgiveness and salvation, but there's a redemption here, as well as acknowledging the human dignity of every single person. And they just completely turned a completely immoral and decadent society on its head and brought us the things that we know and love today, basically human rights, the structure of what real human rights are as they apply to each individual. If we hated Christian Britain and all the moral frame that imposed, or at least brought into bear, we're going to hate post-Christian Britain so much more, because it's all of those things, but without forgiveness, without the idea that somebody can do wrong, but there is redemption for them if they kind of change their behavior or seek forgiveness. The cancel culture has completely removed that ability to bounce back from something that's happened. Things about not valuing every human being because they're made in the image of God means that our bodies are not valued as the way that they're made, but are seen as things that can be changed, altered, mutilated. Children not being valued as something, to have their lives protected. We've already seen that, and the proliferation of abortion. We're seeing in Canada how now the sick, the vulnerable, disabled are now being kind of shooed off to euthanasia. In
the Netherlands, they've reduced the ability for their equivalent of MAID euthanasia program to 1 year old.
1 year old. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I saw a headline only recently about the number of autistic people who are being sent for euthanasia in the Netherlands as well. So with the reduction of valuing each human being as, made in the image of God, as Christianity brought into the society all those years ago, the reduction of all these principles that we have built our just society on, when we shoo Christianity at the door, we just result in chaos with no moral framework at all. So I think we should be very careful before, saying to all these people who are bringing biblical beliefs into the public square and quoting the Bible and raising questions about whether things are helpful and, causing happiness in society, or whether they're harmful and we should be challenging them. And we should think very carefully before shooing them out of the public discussion.
Yeah, and I raised this when I was over in the States about 2 weeks ago now. Blimey, time flies. I said to my friend, the reason that the United States is probably tearing itself apart is because you have a liberal legal framework built atop a Christian culture, but the Christian culture has been hollowed out. And so now you're squabbling over the definition of equality in the Declaration of Independence and saying that all of your beliefs are self-evident, but that you've unmoored them from a creator. And so, okay, you're going to have to make the argument that they're still self-evident without the theological foundation of God being in there. Good luck. It's going to be very difficult to do so. Yeah. So over in Europe, at the same time this was going on, and this is something from ADF as well, the UN Human Rights Council approved a resolution on religious hatred. So the UN are passing blasphemy laws, but only for certain religions that aren't really native to the European continent, funnily enough. The background to this is there was an Iraqi-born protester who, in Sweden, Stockholm, tore pages from the Quran. He wiped his shoes with them and he burned them. It was outside a mosque on Eid. So very, very contentious thing to do, but we would protect his right to do so, even with the Bible, even though I disagree with it. And the Swedish embassy in Baghdad was then stormed by Muslim counter-protesters. Iran refused to send their ambassador to Stockholm. Islamic Cooperation, which is a charity organization, they condemned Sweden's government and they petitioned the UN Human Rights Council to debate the issue. And then Turkey had cited vile protests against the Holy Book as to why it withheld its approval of Sweden's application to join NATO. So it's very fraught and prurient at the time that Ukraine is going on. Since then, since the UN have approved the resolution, Erdogan has supported the application and the admission of Sweden into NATO. So that was part of the pressure that pushed this along. And so addressing the UN Council last week, Pakistan's foreign minister, Bilal Bhutto Zardari, said such acts were an incitement to religious hatred, discrimination and violence, and occurred under government sanction and with the guise of sense of impunity. Ministers from Iran, Saudi Arabia and Indonesia all echoed that view. So there is a Muslim voting bloc within the UN, particularly with Turkey spearheading it, a sizable amount of influence over the current conflicts in Ukraine that have been pushing for Islamic blasphemy laws. And so they passed the resolution, and this is from ADF UK, and the quote in here is, the UN Human Rights Council adopted the resolution that, quote, underscores the need to hold individuals responsible for blasphemy, in particular by desecrating the Quran, to account. The resolution was titled Countering Religious Hatred, Constituting Incitement to Discrimination, Hostility, or Violence. Notice how all of those things are conflated there. And it indicates that such penalties would, quote, be consistent with obligations of states arising from the international human rights law. So they are going to punish you if any of the members of your country are not prosecuted for desecrating the Quran or presumably insulting the Prophet Muhammad or saying something as banal as a Scottish man once did, which was, Islam is questionable. He wrote it on his drive and was prosecuted for that by the Scottish state.
No.
Yes, not joking. So this is an official UN position now.
It's a UN. So it's, I mean, to backtrack a little bit, I used to actually work, I was based with ADF International at the UN Human Rights Council.
Right.
So I have to say these resolutions, this particular one, the UN would not be punishing individuals, but it sets a cultural tone.
Yes.
Is essentially what this resolution does. And
it pressures the countries that obviously want UN support.
It's pressure, exactly. And I can imagine what the tension must have been like in the room at this point, having been there, because this is the first time that balance between that understanding of freedom of speech as being foundational bedrock, that it's the first time that that's been really eroded and tilted away from the kind of Western understanding of free speech. And I will say that the US, the EU and the UK did all push back against this resolution and they voted against it. But they were ultimately outnumbered. And I can't help but wonder, in Europe, as we've seen with Pivey's story, in the UK with these stories we've been examining, even in the US, we're seeing a growing number of people unable to speak freely. And, when we're on the international stage, can we really still hold the credibility that we used to when it comes to free speech? When, countries from the Islamic world, from the Middle East, from other countries with blasphemy law across Africa, when they look at us, do they see countries that are really staying true to the values of free speech that we all signed up to in the ICCPR, the Cornerstone International Human Rights Treaty? Or are they saying, well, you know what, they're bending the rules a little bit when it comes to things that offend their own sensibilities and religion, so what we're doing too isn't so bad.
Yeah, it's consistent.
Right. So we have to really, if we want to be these leaders on the world stage that are standing up for democracy and, the rights of everybody to say what they believe, we have to be practicing that at home. And it really matters. I can tell you from my colleagues who work across the world, we've got blasphemy cases in countries like Nigeria where we've got a Sufi Muslim musician who recorded a kind of rap that he'd written into WhatsApp and lyrics that he was playing with. And he got a death penalty because they deemed what he had said to be blasphemous. Now, he's a Sufi Muslim, and they think that it was blasphemous against the majority Islamic religion of the region. He was sat on death row. We're challenging that. He is being retried, and we're supporting his legal defense, and we're hoping that case will shine light on the danger of blasphemy laws, and it will, as a successful result, will be able to overturn laws in the region where, Christians are constantly under pressure or constantly, finding it very difficult to speak out about their faith for fear of being put to death. So we know the real intensity that these blasphemy laws can look like. We know the impact that it has on individuals. And this resolution, it spoke more specifically about burning the Quran, which is, I think we can all say, is a pretty stupid thing to do. It's not particularly helpful, let's say.
Well, this is the thing, though. It's stupid because of the inevitable threat of violence.
It's stupid because of that. I also don't know if it's a particularly helpful way of putting one's point across. And like you said, if it was the Bible being burnt in the streets of Britain, I would think that's terrible. But I don't think it should be illegal.
Yeah, I'm not going to send you a death threat over it because I'm sane.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So we have to, this opens the door to allowing those further blasphemy laws down the line that we're saying, put people on death row for sending a text message. That opens the door and says, sometimes it's okay to say that somebody's committed a crime for saying what they believe. And then it's very hard then to later on say, now it's not okay to vote. So it is a slippery slope, and we really have to hold these standards, especially at places like the UN Human Rights Council, which are so influential when it comes to interpreting human rights. We have to be really holding and setting that standard and saying, no, nobody should be punished for what they believe. Everybody should be able to speak freely, no matter, if they're from a minority religion or not. So I really hope that this is a little bit of a lesson, at least, to those Western countries who have not been holding those principles to a high enough standard at home to really kind of give them a kick up the butt and say, oh, goodness me, we really do have to make sure that these things are equal so that we can stand on the world stage once again and have authority when we speak about freedom of speech.
Yeah, well, on those 2 points, so there is a quote in this article about the UK government and their dissenting to the resolution. It passed with 28 votes to 14, seven abstentions. The UK said, international human rights law provides us with narrowly defined parameters on which freedom of expression can be limited, and we don't accept that by definition, attacks on religion, including on religious texts or symbols, constitute advocacy of hatred. Suella Braverman noted in the Times, we do not have blasphemy laws in Britain, and that must be complicit in the attempts to impose them on the country. There is no right not to be offended. But the Conservative Party removed that councillor at the start. Same party, same activists. CCHQ
party
are currently investigating him, and they've prosecuted him.
Yeah.
Abortion buffer zones, anyone?
Right.
That's been introduced under the Conservative government.
Yeah.
Section 127 of the Communications Act from Tony Blair has not been removed by the Conservative government. The online harms bill, they were countenancing, what was it? Legal but harmful speech as to whether or not to prosecute people under, including Jimmy Carr's joke at one point before Nadine Dorries got kicked out. So the idea that we don't have de facto blasphemy laws in this country.
Right. But we do. We do have blasphemy laws. You're absolutely right. And let's just dwell on one thing that you said for a moment, because it bears dwelling on. We have put people on criminal trial for praying in their head.
Yes.
There's a thought crime. That's not even speaking. That's not provocative. That's not even a demonstration. That's not trying to upset a particular religious group. That is praying inside one's head. And holding views about abortion, about that every woman should deserve better than abortion, that every life matters from conception, whether that's black, white, disabled, female, male, whatever it is, that life deserves protection and support, and so does their mother. For them to say that somebody who holds those views and or is praying about it or thinking about it inside their heads on a public British street, to say that deserves to be put on criminal trial, it's just absolutely outrageous. And to say that we are upholding free speech and that we should, be so much better than these countries that have blasphemy laws, it really makes a mockery of ourselves.
Yeah, and what we've done here, and I don't think any civilization, as you said with Rome earlier, will last when it begins prosecuting mourners to placate the consciences of murderers. I just don't think that's a good standard to uphold. And I don't think the UN stands on a particularly strong standard. I'll finish with this, because as you said, the UN has an interesting record on free speech. Their Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19, Callum brought this to my attention quite some time ago. They had the Soviets amend this. So the Soviet Union proposed an amendment that would deny the right to Nazi and fascist groups. So this is free speech. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media, regardless of frontiers. It's well worded. This forced the drafters to discuss the question of how tolerant an already just society should be of intolerant groups like the Nazis. Taking together Articles 19 and 7, they solved the dilemma by giving everyone two rights: the right to free speech and the right to be protected against hate speech. Right. So hate speech came from a complaint by the Soviet Union for them to crack down on their dissenters. And the UN is upholding that. If the UN ever wants to tell me that they're for human rights when they're endorsing a state which has killed far more people than even the people they were complaining about, no, not even close. So I suppose we'll leave that one there, because we live in a country with blasphemy laws.
Quite right.
Thank you for watching that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. If you enjoyed, why not visit our website, where you can get the podcast live from 1 p.m. UK time, in full, uncensored, and for free. And for as little as £5 a month, you can get access to our extensive library of premium content and help us keep the lights on around here, with articles like this by John Tangney about political homelessness, with an audio narrated track for silver and gold tier members. If you'd like to see the rest of the content that the team is putting out, you can follow us over on Twitter at @LotusEaters_com. Until next time, goodbye.